Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why we feel it is so important to hold people accountable when they do something wrong? Well, this new study dives deep into the feelings behind that. Imagine someone does something terrible. We often say they deserve to be punished. But what is really going on in our minds when we say that? Are we stating a fact about them? Or are we expressing something else entirely? That is the big question this research tackles. They're proposing a new idea called Retributive Responsibility Expressivism. Basically, it suggests that when we say someone is responsible for doing something wrong, we're not just stating a belief. Instead, we're expressing a feeling, a desire for that person to be punished or blamed. Think of it like this: when you say, "It is raining," you are expressing a belief that it is raining. But when you say X deserves to be punished, this theory says you are actually expressing a desire for X to be punished. It is a bit like saying boo to that action. So how do you test something like that? You can't just ask people, do you feel a retributive desire? The researchers here had a super clever idea. They looked at how people talk and what sounds right or wrong to them. They borrowed a method from studies on moral language. It is called using Moorean absurdities. You might know Moore's paradox, like saying, "It is raining, but I don't believe it is raining." That sounds weird, right? How can you know it is raining, but not believe it? The researchers thought that if responsibility statements are really about expressing desires, then saying something like X deserves to be punished, but I don't want X to be punished, should sound just as weird. They had two main ideas they wanted to test. First, they predicted that these Moorean responsibility sentences would sound weird or nonsensical to people. If saying someone deserves punishment is actually expressing a desire for punishment, then saying they deserve it but you don't want them punished would be like saying, "I believe it is raining, but I don't believe it is raining." It is a contradiction in the very expression of the idea. Second, they thought about who is saying it. With the "it is raining, but I don't believe it is raining" example, the weirdness comes from the speaker contradicting their own belief. But if someone else says it is raining, but she doesn't believe it is raining, that doesn't sound nearly as strange. The researchers predicted that the same thing would happen with responsibility. If someone says, "She deserves to be punished, but I don't want her punished," that should sound really odd. But if they say, "She deserves to be punished, but he doesn't want her punished," that should sound more normal. This first person versus third person difference would be a big clue that the speaker's own feelings are what is really being expressed. To test this, they ran two studies. In study 1, they gathered 80 English speakers and showed them different sentences. Some sentences were like the classic Moorean absurdities, but about facts like "Bill is tall and I don't think he is tall." Others were about responsibility, like "Catherine deserves to be punished for stabbing her husband, and I don't want her to be punished at all." They then asked people if each sentence made sense or did not make sense. They used two versions, a first-person version where I was denying the desire and a third-person version where someone else was denying it. What did they find? Well, it was interesting. For the regular sentences about facts, like "Bill is tall," people found the first person, "I don't think he is tall" version way weirder than the third person, "Catherine does not think he is tall" version. This matches our understanding of Moore's paradox. For the responsibility sentences, they saw something similar. But with a twist, people found the first-person version, "I don't want her to be punished," to be more nonsensical than the third-person version. This supports their idea that our own desires are tightly linked to our responsibility statements. However, a lot of people still thought even the first-person responsibility sentences made sense. That made the researchers think more about why that might be. They realized that maybe people weren't always taking the first part of the sentence as the speaker's own firm belief or feeling. They might have been hearing it as "people say that X deserves to be punished," or "it is generally believed that X deserves to be punished." This is called an exocentric reading, where you are not talking about your own feelings but about what others think. To fix this, they designed study 2. This time, they added the phrase, "that is my opinion" to the beginning of the first part of the sentence. For example, "George deserves to be punished for killing his wife and children. That's my opinion and I do not want him to be punished at all." This was to make sure people were focusing on the speaker's own thoughts and feelings. And what happened this time? This is where it gets really compelling, when they forced people to focus on their own opinion. The first-person responsibility sentences became overwhelmingly perceived as nonsensical. Almost all participants judged these sentences as not making sense. The third-person versions, where someone else's desire was denied, still made sense. This strongly supports the idea that when we say someone deserves punishment, it is deeply tied to our own desire for them to be punished. It is not just an observation of fact. So what does all this mean? The results really line up with the expressivist idea. They found that when people have to deny their own retributive desire, the sentence sounds nonsensical, like a genuine absurdity. This is especially true when it is about their own feelings in the first person. And when they made sure people were thinking about their own opinion, the nonsensical feeling got even stronger. This provides some pretty solid evidence that saying someone is responsible for a wrongdoing might be more about expressing our desire for them to face consequences than stating an objective truth. Now, are there other explanations? The researchers consider one, the linguistic association hypothesis. This idea is that maybe people found the sentences weird not because of a deep semantic meaning, but because we're just not used to hearing them together. We're used to hearing X deserves punishment and I want X punished go hand in hand. So, when they're put together in a contradictory way, it just sounds awkward, like a social convention being broken. But the researchers point out that this doesn't fully explain why the first-person version is so much weirder than the third person. If it was just about convention, both should sound awkward. The implications here are pretty big, especially for the long-standing debate about free will. Traditionally, philosophers assume that to be held responsible, you need to have free will. They look at our intuitions about responsibility to figure out what free will means. But if responsibility statements are really about expressing our retributive desires, then they might not tell us much about whether someone actually had free will in a metaphysical sense. It suggests that our judgments about responsibility might be more about our own emotional responses and desires for justice than about objective facts about an agent's freedom. The researchers also talk about different versions of this expressivist idea. There is pure expressivism, where the statement is only about expressing a non-cognitive feeling, like a desire. Then there is hybrid expressivism, where the statement expresses both a feeling and some kind of belief, maybe about whether the person acted freely. The studies they did strongly support the idea that these feelings are involved, but they don't completely rule out that there might be beliefs mixed in too. This is where it gets really thought-provoking. If pure expressivism is right, then our everyday judgments about who is responsible might be less about the agent's actual free will and more about our own inner workings. This could mean that the way philosophers have traditionally used responsibility judgments to understand free will might be flawed. It is like trying to understand a machine by just listening to the sounds it makes without looking at its internal mechanics. Our desire for punishment might be driving our responsibility judgments, rather than our judgments about free will driving our desire for punishment. So, to wrap it up, this research suggests that when we say someone deserves to be punished, we're likely expressing our own retributive desire for that punishment, rather than just stating a neutral fact. The Moorean absurdity they found, especially in the first-person statements, is a strong clue. It means our judgments about responsibility are deeply intertwined with our emotional and desire-based responses. This challenges some traditional ways of thinking about free will and moral responsibility, suggesting we might need to pay more attention to our own feelings when we talk about accountability. The story here isn't over, though future research could explore if this applies to positive responsibility, like praise, or to different cultures. It's a fascinating look into the heart of why we hold each other to account. And that's it for this episode of RUBIN'S Mind Lab. What do you think about these findings? Does saying someone is responsible feel more like an expression of your own feelings or a statement of fact to you? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the psychology of responsibility, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more brain-bending research, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. See you next time.